identity and peaceful, free from fabrications. So today, here, the Namgyal Monastery, Gamgyur, and the Leshiling Monastery yesterday had the inaugural ceremony of the school, having completed the construction of the school building. So we had the ceremony yesterday. And in connection with this construction of the school, the students of Tromtok Rinpoche, the abbot of Namgyal Monastery, his disciples from Italy and also from Vietnam have come here, and they requested for a teaching. So I decided to give teaching on the three principal aspects of the path, giving an explanation. And then amongst the Namgyal Monastery monks, there are students from the northeastern state of Arunachal Pradesh, Mon region, and then their parents also have come here to the inauguration ceremony. And for these Mönpas, we have a translation into Hindi in the other hall, the Kalachakra hall. So the main students for this teaching on the three principal aspects of the path are these sponsors and the parents. And then there are a few Tibetans, newcomers from Tibet, who have come to India for the first time. So they are also here present for the teaching. So, as usual, before giving the teaching itself, I usually talk about the necessity of of spirituality or religion, and then what Buddhism is about. I give introduction to it as well. And so, in the 21st century, the religion is something which is relevant, and particularly Buddhism. So when you see this, we need to understand what Buddhism is about. So I give introduction to it. So having understood the teaching, then you could develop faith based on reason, and then go on with the practice, so that you will consider it very important, that you see the importance of practicing the Dharma. Otherwise, you just take it as some kind of a custom. So we are in the 21st century now, where there has been lots of advancement, high advancements in material terms. And together with this material development, we have better medical facilities, better economy, and also communications. So there has been great advancements in these fields. And so lifestyle of people have become easier. People's living standards have become better and easier. So we don't need to explain this. People consider material development very important, and therefore they talk about economy all the time, everywhere. So about 3 generations ago, people have thought that if they were to make material development, there will be great happiness, and they would be able to fulfill their goals. But that has not happened. instead of giving more happiness and so forth, bringing more happiness and so forth, there has been lots of problems. And because of material development, there has been also a development in terms of weapons, and which are used to kill one another, human beings, one another, and to harm others. So people have indulged in harming others, human beings. And therefore, with regard to this, it's not just physically harming others, but in one's own mind, being full of attachment and anger, and also a sense of competition and jealousy. Therefore, people have killed one another and also abused one another, and then there's huge gap between rich and poor. This is the result of only thinking of material development without and lacking in paying attention to the inner values of love, compassion, and so forth. So though we have, despite the material developments in the world, people are killing each other and people are tormenting each other, torturing each other. And then the religion also is used to discriminate others from oneself with the sense of we and they, and therefore people kill each other, which is inconceivable, unthinkable. All religions talk about love, compassion, patience, self-discipline, yet the very system which teaches these values, for example, in the case of Burma, the followers of the teaching of Buddha, which is rooted in compassion, despite being practitioners of Buddhism with attachment to one's own tradition, the Buddhists are torturing others, the Muslims in there. And then within amongst the Muslims, there are fighting or conflict between the Shia and Sunni, and then amongst those of the Catholics, the Christians, there are fightings in Ireland or between those of the Protestants and the Catholics and so forth. So we here, gathered here, are peaceful, but at the same time, on this planet, people like us, who are similar to us, are killing each other. In many places, people are dying of starvation. Children, helpless children, without any protection and guardians, are dying of starvation. So all these facilities that we have in the world, if they could be used with the altruistic sense of caring for others, this will not happen. So this kind of starvation will not happen. Will not happen. So without thinking of others, but if you just think of yourself alone, of course, you will not think of caring of others. So of course we are So of course, as human beings, we have problems of that we are bound to experience, such as those of the suffering of birth, aging, sickness, and death. But on top of that, if because of lack of caring, the sense of caring for others, we are unable to help others as well. So this is the blessing for the tea and the bread. 처음에 계시죠. 생간사인데. 로 생간사이 사민도. 안 돼요, 안 돼요. 먹어도 키워, 자 새로 치면서. 아니 야시다. 똥바르시. And so as human beings, therefore, there are lots of problems created by us as human beings, and this cannot go away merely by praying through prayers. So if we could even help a single human person in terms of developing our compassion, love for others, I mean, this is something we could do and we should do. I mean, as Buddhists, we always pray that may all sentient beings have happiness and its causes and so forth. And if you really mean what you pray, mean by this prayer, then you should do something practically. So the merely focusing on the material development has brought us lots of problems, and this cannot be overcome merely through prayers. And the problems arise due to the unruly mind because of not being able to discipline and control our mind. And what we need to develop is the sense of universal responsibility. So we should think about the happiness and well-being of others, and to overcome their suffering and problems. So the essence is to develop a good heart, warm heart, which has to come through training of the mind, not by taking some kind of medicine or pills, not through exercises, physical exercises, not through money and wealth. Therefore, those of us on this planet who are following the religious traditions, the different religious traditions, of course, philosophically may be different, but all the major religious traditions of the world teach love, compassion, patience, tolerance, forgiveness, contentment, and self-discipline. So in this 21st century today, all the religious traditions are still relevant in terms of helping human beings. But when people talk about religion, I mean, if we just think of following the religions as if it were just kind of a habit, it does not really help. As there is a saying, we need to turn the Dharma, the religions, into a true practice of religion. What that means is to make transformation within ourselves by integrating the teachings of these religious traditions, whichever you are following, within yourself, the messages. So by believing in the religion, you should practice it and then help others. And then in this world, there are many who are non-believers in the religious traditions. So from amongst the 7 billion people on this earth, 1 billion, over 1 billion are without any belief system and religious belief. Of course, they are not to be blamed. Religion seems to be not so effective for people, even those who follow their religious traditions and who are actually being disgraced to their religion, and therefore their people turn away from religion as well. And so 1 billion people on this earth are without any religious belief, and then 6 billion people are supposed to be believers in religious traditions, but from amongst them there are those who in the name of religion, fight against others and create discrimination and bias and division without really practicing the main messages of the religious tradition, their religion, which are love, compassion, patience, or tolerance. So we need really to believe in these, gain conviction in these religious practices, and then be practical about them. And people are saying they are religious followers of this and that religious tradition, Christianity, Buddhism, Islam, and so forth. But when they really face problems, they use religion to cause trouble to others. And this is actually against their own religious tradition, whose main message is that of love and compassion. Therefore, we need to develop firm conviction in the teaching of love and compassion and practice it. So those without religion, no need to mention, but those who follow the religions, of course, need to practice love and compassion, and even those without religious belief need to or have to practice love and compassion. Because if you are able to live your life in love and compassion, it will help you to take care of yourself and others, not only thinking of your profit for yourself alone, but and disregard the well-being and happiness of others until the problems and difficulties befall you. So we sometimes become indifferent to the sufferings of others. That must not happen. Therefore, we need to develop love and compassion, which is extremely important in our life. So because this gives us a happy life, a joyful life in this very life, so we need to understand and be aware that love and compassion brings happiness in our life. So as human beings, we live as human social animals. Therefore, the individuals rely on the community, and that very community, we are dependent. If we don't care about it, but remain selfish and self-centered, that doesn't really help. And therefore, we must understand how we are interconnected, dependent with the community that we live in. Because if you think of the community at large, you will also think of the well-being of the community, and that in turn, through that, you also benefit to fulfill your own goal as well. And so all human beings, it's very important for us to be warm-hearted. Is it possible to do that? Of course, yes. Because the basic human nature is compassionate. It's not about, we are not talking about religion as such. Even scientists are saying this through their own experiments and research. People who live with a good heart and warm heart will have less sickness and disease and live long. Whereas if you're full of love, hate, attitude, anger and so forth, it really harms your physical health, and your longevity also diminishes. So if you live self-centered, selfish, then you will be lonely. Whereas if you think of the well-being of others, if you're altruistic, you'll have more friends. Therefore, love and compassion, affection is essential in human community, human society. So this must be understood. We should not just think that, oh, being kind and loving and so forth are good, it'll help us in the next life. That's not what we are talking about. In this very life, if you are compassionate, loving, and warm-hearted, you will have more friends. And more peaceful within yourself. So, religious teachings are not enough today to teach about this, but we need actually to introduce these inner values of love, compassion, and so forth in our school system. Because the whole society is lacking in these practices. So we as human beings need to live a happy life. The material development has brought about sensorial gratification, engaging in, listening, seeing beautiful sights and listening to interesting music and enjoying delicious food, and also have having a good smell and fragrance, as well as touch, and including sex, are related with our sensorial experiences. So these experiences, however good they may be, are very temporary. Because when you see a beautiful sight, a show, for example, you may have some joy and happiness, but as soon as this show goes away, show ends, that happiness or joy ends. But rather than depending on our sensorial experiences of gratification, we need to use our own mind to develop happiness. For example, developing faith, and also developing confidence within yourself, pride, which have to do with our mind, not the sensorial experiences. So whether you have the sensorial, stimulus or not, when you have these experiences based on faith, self-confidence and so forth, you'll be calm and happy. The material development, of course, gives some satisfaction, which are more sensorial. And the modern science, when they explain our human psychology, they usually explain it on the basis of sensorial experiences, and they have not paid much attention to the mind itself, the mental experiences as such. So we want happiness, which has to do more than the sensorial experiences with the mind itself, the mental experiences. And therefore, it is important to understand the workings and the system of the mind. And therefore, mainly, we need to train our mind for love and compassion. Because what disturbs our mind, mental peace of mind, is anger and jealousy, which arise because of our desire, lust. So these can be reduced, the lust and attachment can be reduced through the practice of contentment, wanting less. Because when we have attachment to something, then as soon as there is some kind of opposition to it, we become angry. And then also this jealousy arising. Jealousy and anger arise through many different factors, not just, they don't have any one single factor that give rise to them. And therefore, we need to understand human psychology better in terms of how these destructive emotions arise and how these destructive emotions gives rise to physical illness as well. When you are angry, when in anger intensely develops, you lose your peace of mind. And irritation also is a cause of anger. And that also is because we are so attached to ourselves. There is this self-cherishing attitude, because of which we become irritated when some provocation happens. And therefore, we need to develop love. In order to do away with this self-cherishing attitude, we need to develop the sense of cherishing others over oneself. And so this is something worth developing, because we care about our physical well-being. So if you care about your physical well-being, you need to also be careful with your behavior as well, and not to cause disturbance of your mind. So I usually talk about hygiene, physical hygiene. Of course, we do talk about physical hygiene, and therefore we also need to take care of the mental hygiene as well. So with this, regardless of whether we are believers or non-believers, we need to actually find a means to create a compassionate world for all human beings on earth. This is very important to think about. So external material things, of course, cannot develop these love and compassion. So for over 1,000 years, all the religious traditions have been teaching this principle of love and compassion, and they have really benefited so many human beings. So internal development and transformation can be brought about through the spiritual traditions. Whereas when we use the term, the English word, religion, maybe because it comes from Judeo-Christian background, many people say that the English word religion has to do with the Creator God, whereas it does not fit for the Indian religious traditions. So we need to still do further research whether this word is right to use for Buddhism or not. Some people say that Buddhism is not a religion as such, but it's a science of mind. So because religion may, in that sense, religion may have some connotation of doing certain practices that have to do with a creator, and do with practices based on faith alone. So whereas in the Indian religious traditions, we talk about, there is lots of explanation about shamatha, the calm abiding, and vipassana, the insight meditation. So whereas the Creator God, the religions, theistic religions believing in Creator God, of course keep faith in the Creator God, and then they do their practice accordingly. Whereas the psychology that we find in Indian religions, of course, although they have their roots in the religious traditions of India, and we could use this the teachings in terms of academic subject, as an academic subject, to promote love and compassion in the world. So in the case of Vietnamese, historically, Vietnam is a Buddhist country, and particularly you are a follower of Nalanda tradition and follower of Master Nagarjuna. And then the Italian Dharma friends, generally speaking, you come from Judeo-Christian background. Of course, Italy, as a nation, is a Judeo-Christian nation, and Buddhism is something new to you. But because of the different mental dispositions of people, of course, people take interest in Buddhism as well. And because now, today, we have, when education has developed so much, people have taken interest in the teaching of the Buddha, seeing it as something which uses reason and logic to develop faith and conviction. And therefore, there are people who have taken interest in the teaching of the Buddha. And although you come from Judeo-Christian background, as a nation, Judeo-Christian background, there are people amongst the Italians who follow the teaching of the Buddha and Nalanda tradition, and particularly the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. And regarding the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, it was Master Chandrakshita in the 8th century who was invited by the Tibetan Emperor Tsongkahpa. And Master Chandrakshita introduced Buddhism, the Nalanda tradition, to us. And he actually introduced how we should engage in the study of the teaching of the Buddha. And he was a proponent of the Madhyamaka philosophy, and also was a great master of logic. And therefore, when he introduced Buddhism, he followed the Madhyamaka tradition. He introduced the Madhyamaka tradition based on reason and logic. So when we engage in the process of the triple process of hearing, reflecting, and meditating, he introduced this Nalanda tradition through reason. And after his death, Master Kamalashila also came to Tibet, and Kamalashila himself was also a great master. If we read their writings, the writings of Master Chandrakshita and Kamalashila, you'll see how greatly learned they are, they were, and we don't have to say, oh, they were great, just as an historical kind of a person or personality, that they were great, but we could actually see their greatness through their writings. So by reading their writings, we'll be able to see they were real great scholars, Master Chandrakshita and Kamalashila and so forth. It's not just that they were scholars in words, but they teach us how to deal with our emotions and how to transform ourselves. So we are following a pure Nalanda tradition in Tibet. So in the past, people were more or less lost in doing some kind of a sacred dance and wearing masks and different costumes and so forth. And the people who were really learned and great scholars were didn't receive much attention from the general public, but lamas who have certain titles and names were considered more important, and therefore other people, Westerners, have given the term Lamaism to our tradition, the Buddhist tradition that we have. But in the recent decades, as people have understood that the Buddhism that we follow is in the pure tradition of Nalanda monastic institution, when they have actually they think less of Tibetan Buddhism as being Lamaism as such. So of all the religious traditions of the world, Buddhism is found to have a profound philosophical idea and concepts, and many people are taking interest in it and studying Buddhist philosophy for over 20, 30 years through scriptural citations and logic mainly. Such a tradition of studying Buddhism using the scriptures and logic, which is unique, is found amongst Tibetans. This is what people notice these days. And therefore, my Dharma friends from Italy, although you come from Christian country, your forebears have always believed in Creator God and prayed to God. But you have found this tradition that we have, which follows the Nalanda tradition, is something different, and you follow it. So religion is an individual matter. Culture is related with a society, a community, whereas religion has to do with individuals. So whatever societal culture that you may have, Tibetan culture is more or less in the spirit of Buddhism. But within Tibetan community, there are Christians, there are also Muslims. So you as Italians have Christian culture, but you follow the Buddhism because you find it Buddhism to be suitable and beneficial to you. I personally do not encourage people to be Buddhists, and I do not try to propagate Buddhism to others. But when people find certain religious tradition to be more suitable to them and more relevant and suitable to them, they could follow that religion. And so, with regard to introduction to religion, of course, of all the religious traditions of the world, most of the religions are theistic religion, believing in a creator God. And in order to promote faith and have intense, strong faith in the creator God, they use this reason of a creation by God, so which is also good. When you are able to develop single-pointed faith in God, the purpose of that is to develop love and compassion to others. And in the case of Islam, just as the followers of Islam, the Muslims, just as they have faith and they keep their faith in Allah, they say that they should also extend their love towards all creature of Allah, the entire creature, because the Creator God or Allah is seen as full of love, infinite love. Nobody says that God or Allah is full of anger. Of course, we in our old pantheons of deities, we also have wrathful ones, who was even said to gulp in the three planes of existence. But if we read the writings of our great scholars of Buddhism, there are objections to create a God, because God is seen as self-emanated, self-evolved, and the doer of everything, happiness and suffering, and so forth, according to Buddhism, are because of our own karma, our own actions, and not because of some deity, a creator as such, according to Buddhism. But when God and Allah are seen as infinite love, they are embodiments of love, and then the followers themselves also try to emulate that kind of God and to become more compassionate and loving and caring. And therefore, when we talk about having a more compassionate and loving world, everyone can accept this. So, amongst the religions, there are those of the religions believing in Creator God, and then those non-theistic religions. So, in India, there are, regarding the second group, there are those of the Sankhya school, non-theistic Sankhya school, and then Jainism and Buddhism, which do not believe in a Creator God. Otherwise, the rest of the religious traditions of India do believe in Creator God. And then religions that evolved in the Middle East, such as Christianity, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, Zoroastrianism, all of them believe in Creator God. So Buddhism is a non-theistic religion. So amongst the non-theistic religions, of course, a self or soul, which is the experiencer and the doer of one's pain and pleasure, is believed by Sankhya and Jainism. So they do not believe in a Creator God, but they believe in a soul, a permanent soul, which is the experiencer and the doer of one's pain and pleasure. Whereas Buddhism does not believe, believes neither in a Creator God nor such a permanent, enduring self or soul. And Buddhism, on the other hand, teaches Anatma theory, selflessness, theory of selflessness. So when giving teaching to his followers and disciples, the Buddha, in his first sermon of the turning of the wheel of Dharma, he taught that things come through causes and conditions. He taught the law of causality, but he did not mention a doer, which is a soul as such. And so he taught that of selflessness of persons. So in the Vaibhashika and Sautantika schools of thought within Buddhism, they do assert selflessness of person. Whereas in the second turning of the wheel of Dharma, for example, we come across in the Heart Sutra, which mentions that the 5 aggregates, the 5 psychophysical aggregates are without any intrinsic existence or nature. So, therefore, there is the teaching of self having no independent existence. In the first turning of the wheel of Dharma, the Buddha mainly teaches that the self is without any devoid of self-sufficiently, substantially existent self. Whereas in the second turning, not only this person, but even the psychophysical aggregates, which on the basis of which a person is designated, are devoid of any intrinsic independent existence. And therefore, the selflessness of phenomena is also taught in the second turning of the wheel of Dharma, which comprise those of the perfection of wisdom teachings. And so, on the basis of the first turning of the wheel of Dharma, we have those of the philosophical schools of Vaibhashikas and Sautantikas. And then, based on these later turnings of the wheel of Dharma, we have the Chittamatra school of thought. So on the basis of the third turning of wheel of Dharma, the one aspect of the third turning of wheel of Dharma, based on which we have Chittamatra school of thought, and then there we have the Madhyamaka school of thought as well. So within Buddhist tradition as a whole, we have these different philosophical schools. Because of the difference in the mental dispositions of the beings following the teaching of the Buddha. So we have the Vaibhashika, Sautantika, Chittamatras, and Madhyamaka schools of thought. And in Tibet, we have also a genre of teachings, or which are called Dhupta, the philosophical systems or tenets, which are based on Master Bhaviveka's Tarkajvala, a blaze of reasoning. So there is a separate, there are separate texts, genre of texts called Dhupta in the Tibetan Buddhist traditions. So which is very helpful in understanding the different philosophical assertions and the schools of thoughts that developed in India. So what we need to do when we study these philosophical systems is use reason and logic. So when we use reason and logic, we cannot just base on one text, but we need to actually see different texts and compare what is said in them, what is taught in this text and what is said in other texts, that text, and so forth. So in this way, we are able to do away with a lot of doubts and misunderstandings regarding the reality of things. And therefore, within Tibetan Buddhism, we have the old translation school, of the Nyingma school, and the Sarma, the new translation schools. So from the demarcation is drawn from the time of Lodchen, the great translator, Lodchen Rinchen Sangpo. So after Lodchen Rinchen Sangpo, the new translation school evolved in Tibet, which includes the Kagyu tradition, which has the 4 major and 8 minor schools within it, and then those of the Nyingma school. There are those of the Karma, Dharma, and within the revealed treasure teachings, we have the 100 revealers of the treasure teachings, and so forth. And then there are the profound visionary teachings also. And then in the Sarma, the new translation school, there is also there of the Sakya tradition. And within the Sakya, there are the Sakya, Ngorpa and Tsarpa traditions. And then the Kadam tradition also developed in the Sarma tradition. So, based on the explanation of the teaching, there are those of the Kadampa, Shungpawa, Mengapa, and Lamrimpa. So, using the 6 different classic texts, we have the Kadam Shungpawa, the scriptural followers, or the Kadampas following the scriptures. And then, giving the essence of the teaching, we have the Lamrimpas, those following the teaching on the basis of the stages of the path. And then we have the Kadam instruction, the pith instruction lineage, which the followers of which follow the essential instructions from masters. And then later, the Gelug tradition evolved since the time of Master Tsongkahpa. So all these Tibetan Buddhist traditions study the great classic texts, such as the 13 classic texts. So Sakya, Nyingma, Gelug, Kagyu, all traditions follow the 13 texts, classic or great texts. Whereas there is difference when these different traditions follow their own instruction lineage, the Prince instruction lineage. And then in the Gelug tradition, we have following the Ipit instruction, the tradition, the Segyu. So there are the 7 Segyu lineage, and then Wensa lineage, and Shungpa lineage. But all of them converge to that of the teaching found in the Kangyur and Tengyur. So whether it's Nyingma, Sarma, Kangyur, Sakya, Gelug, whichever tradition we are following, we all are follower of the same teacher. Whereas there has been lots of discrimination and sectarianism that had developed amongst the followers of Tibetan Buddhist traditions, saying that we are followers of Kagyu or Chonang and so forth, criticizing the others. Because of this kind of sectarianism, there has been lots of fightings amongst the religious traditions, which is really shameful. Even today, we have, when we see people fighting in the name of religion, saying we are this follower of this and that tradition, and we find it really unfortunate. So when we think in retrospect, when we think what had happened in our own community, society, we should really feel ashamed. So today we need really to be harmonious amongst the religious traditions of Tibetan Buddhism and have respect each other. So many of the people who have come here are not new to my teachings. So with the Buddha coming into the world and with the teaching having been taught, we need to actually have a pure vision of the different religious traditions that we have and be in harmony amongst our traditions, thinking that we are followers of the same teacher, the Buddha, and also following the teachings of the Kenlop Sum, the Buddhism that we have, which was established by Master Chandarakshita with the help of Master Padmasambhava at the invitation of the King Trisong Detsen. So these 3 personalities, historical personalities, are the ones of whose tradition we are following. The King Trisong Detsen, Master Padmasambhava, and the Abbot Chandarakshita. So today we are going to have teaching on the 3 principal aspects of the path written by Je Rinpoche, Master Tsongkahpa. And so I'm going to give a brief explanation of this text. So if you have the book, just open it, but I'm following another translation because I don't have the book. So just as I've just mentioned, we have the Nyingma and Sarma traditions of Buddhism that have flourished in Tibet. So Master Tsongkahpa was someone who actually received teachings from all the different traditions, such as Nyingma, which he received teachings on from Lhodak Drupchen Namkha Gyaltsen, the great Mahasiddha from Lhodak, Namkha Gyaltsen. So who was someone who followed the Nyingma tradition and had a pure vision of Vajrapani, the Lord of the sacred teachings. like meeting a person to person. And then Master Tsongkapa also received teachings from the Kagyu tradition as well as the Sakya tradition. He mainly studied the great texts, the classical texts in the Sakya tradition. And then the Gadam tradition also he received. So Master Tsongkapa received teachings from all the different traditions that were extant in Tibet during his time. And he studied the writings impartially, without being satiated with the partial teachings. He studied the writings of the 6 great ornaments and 2 sublime masters. So he actually listened extensively to the teachings of these great Indian masters found in the Tengyur. And then, as I said earlier, without partiality and without touching the texts of these 6 ornaments and 2 sublime masters, just roughly, he actually studied them extensively. But there were people who studied these writings rather partially. What that means is they just are satisfied with some kind of word, explanation of the words, just roughly going through the teachings, the writings, whereas Gelugpas who follow Tsongkapa should follow the footsteps of Master Tsongkapa himself, studying in great detail these classic writings of the Mat. So Master Tsongkapa went through extensive learning in the beginning, and then he says in the middle he found the teachings to be spiritual instructions, dawned to him as spiritual instructions, and then in the end he put them into practice day and night for the benefit of flourishing the Dharma. And he says he finds himself fortunate in his writing. So he instructs his followers not to be partial in their studies and not to be satisfied with just partial study, but study all different texts in great detail. So Master Tsongkapa, during his time, was someone who was a top scholar. So there is a prayer which prays to Rendawa and Tsongkapa and Lotsawa, the 3 masters who wrote this. I don't know. His Holiness is asking who is the author of this verse. So we recite this verse, which mentions these great personalities: the great Lotsawa, Master Rendawa, and Master Tsongkapa. But we don't know who wrote this. So it must have been written after Tsongkapa, around the time of his own time. So this praise says, the one who's learned in all the sciences, the great translator, the omniscient translator, and Master Rendawa, whose intelligence is as vast as the space, So in one of the writings of a master, it is mentioned that Master Rendawa was very fond of the Madhyamaka philosophy. And so at that time, they developed a saying which goes like, it is Madhyamaka tradition, whether you are sitting or walking or doing anything. So, so Master Rendawa, whose intelligence is as vast as space, so these three incomparable masters were praised in this verse. So just as I said that in order to know Master Nagarjuna and other great masters, you need to look at their writings. So similarly, in the case of Master Tsongkahpa, you need to understand him by reading his writings. And particularly, if you read his explanation or commentary on Madhyamaka Karika, Mula Madhyamaka Karika, and also the Madhyamaka Avatara commentary on them, you'll see how his style of explaining and commenting the words in these books. So when he writes, for example, when he wrote the explanation of Master Madhyamaka Avatara or Madhyamaka Karika, you'll see how Master Tsongkahpa brings in the views and assertions of other masters, the different masters like Bhavaviveka, Buddhapalita, Chandrakirti, and so forth. And in that praise that I mentioned, he was praised as the custodian or the master of the entire teaching of the Buddha. So if you read his writings, you'll see how he interprets the different philosophical systems, so that you gain a comprehensive and broad understanding of the different traditions as well. So these writings, this particular text that Master Tsongkahpa wrote, the three principal aspects of the path, was not written as a treatise, but it was written for Tsaku Umbo Ngawan Chakpa as to go about with the practice, how to go about with the practice of the Dharma. At the end of the text, it mentions, thus, when you have understood as they are the essentials of the three principles of the path, O son, seek solitude, and by enhancing the power of perseverance, swiftly accomplish your ultimate aspiration. And in the miscellaneous writings of Master Tsongkahpa, he has written to Tsaku Wambo, this disciple, follow my words, and I will guide you throughout your lifetimes. And when I become enlightened, I will share the nectar of my teaching, the first with you. So this is an instruction that was offered to Tsaku Umbo Ngawan Chakpa. I received this teaching on this from Tata Rinpoche and Ling Rinpoche as well, and also Tijang Rinpoche. So these three incomparable, unsurpassed three masters, from them I have received these teachings. And then homage to the venerable teacher. So a master who has no concern for the pleasures of this life, but is concerned about the happiness in the next lives. and beyond. So someone who goes beyond the pleasures of this life, concerns of this life alone, goes beyond it, and that's why he is called the foremost. So Je refers to the foremost one, and Jun refers, has the connotation of someone who is concerned for the concerned with the paths pertaining to beings of intermediate scope, seeing the faults of samsara. So that they are not preoccupied with the concerns of the worldly samsaric pleasures and life, and restraining their mind. Showing restraint to the pleasures of this life and the samsaric life. And so Lama, or teacher, refers to someone who has both the principles of method and wisdom, which leads one out of this samsara as well as the peace of nirvana. Therefore, this homage, the first line, is paid to one's Lama or a guru who has the qualifications mentioned, the 10 qualifications mentioned in Sutra Alamkara, Mahayana Sutra Alamkara by Maitreya. So Master Tsongkhapa's writings are very comprehensive and very encompassing. Whereas other writings of other masters may be quite clear, but they are not so pervasive or universal or encompassing. But Master Tsongkhapa's writings are not like that. So with regard to the disciple relationship between disciples and their masters, a master must be someone, the master is considered someone who is there to tame the disciple's mind. And for someone to be a tamer of someone else's mind, they themselves must be tamed. Because without being so, you cannot tame others. You cannot just have the title Lama for nothing. And therefore, I usually make with regard to the relationship between the Lama and Tulku, I say that there are four-fold relationship. There are Tulkus, but not Lamas. So there are Tulkus who are disgrace to the Dharma, and they are not Lamas, therefore. Whereas there are Lamas who are not Tulkus. So there are people who are qualified masters of the Dharma, but they may not be reincarnated, recognized reincarnations. And then there are both those who are Tulkus as well as Lamas, and then not. And so Tsongkhapa says that those who wish to tame others must first tame themselves. And with regards to taming oneself, you cannot just have any kind of practices and become someone famous, having some kind of realization and power, and some kind of such as power of being very accurate in their divination and so forth, or some kind of a clairvoyance. But you must be someone who has the experience of the 3 trainings which are taught in the 3 Pitaka. So a Lama who gives teachings to others to discipline the disciples must first be tamed oneself. For example, if you are a teacher in school, you must first know the subject that you are teaching to your students, without which you cannot teach. So similarly, as a Dharma teacher, a guru, you must have the knowledge of what you are going to teach your disciples and then have the experience as well. Which would be used to tame others. So the first line actually comprises or fulfills that of the teaching of the reliance on Guru. And then the first verse, the essential points of all the scriptures of the conqueror. This first verse, so the essential points of the scriptures of the conqueror. If you read the Lamrim, the stages of the path to enlightenment, within which there are teachings pertaining to beings of small faculty. So with regard to these teachings pertaining to the beings of small faculty, so the first 7 non-virtuous actions of body and speech are common to other religious traditions as well. And then the third category, which are the 3 non-virtuous actions of mind, within which there is the wrong view, which may be interpreted according to the different religious traditions. Whereas when we come to the teachings pertaining to beings of intermediate scope or faculty, we introduce that of the true cessation. And in order to understand that well, we need to find the antidote to the negative, the destructive emotions. And the goal is, our goal is that of liberation, nirvana. So the essence of the teaching of the Buddha, the scriptures, is that of selflessness, which leads us to liberation. And that has to do with the sense of wishing to be free from the cycle of existence. And then the path acclaimed by all excellent Buddhas teaches that of Bodhichitta, refers to Bodhichitta, which considers others more important than oneself. So in the Lamrim, the stages of the path, and the Lojong, the mind training text, there are lots of teachings on Bodhichitta. The great gateway for the fortunate ones aspiring for liberation refers to that of the view of emptiness. If you have this understanding and insight into emptiness, then you can actually shake that of the grasping at true existence from within your mind. So this is the gateway of the fortunate ones wishing liberation. I shall explain here to the best of my ability, shows Tsongkahpa's humility. Because in this text, he is saying that he is going to give teaching concisely in few words. And then those who are not attached to the joys of cyclic existence, by seeing the excellence of samsara as faulty, whatever pleasure there may be in some cyclic existence, such as the material developments that we have today, due to which there is lots of pleasure that we draw. but they do not have any essence. As long as we live in this body, this kind of psychophysical aggregates, there is no real pleasure or happiness, because this very psychophysical aggregates that we have is the source of suffering. Those not attached to the cycle of existence, joys of cycle of existence, who strive to make meaningful this life of leisure and opportunity. So in order to achieve that, if you practice bodhicitta, each moment you create huge merit and do away with a lot of negativities, and who place their trust in the path that pleases the conquerors. So those who have faith and, oh, fortunate ones, listen with an open heart. This is an exhortation to listen to the teaching. And then the reason for developing the wish to be free from samsara, and the why we need to develop it, and and the reason for developing it, and the measure for having developed this. Without pure renunciation, there is no means to pacify the yearning for the joys and fruits of samsaric existence. And as craving for existence chain us thoroughly at first search for true renunciation. So with aversion or sense of repulsion to the cycle of the pleasures of cycle of existence, so this sense of wishing to reach liberation is very important. So whatever pleasure there may be in the world, in the cycle of existence, they are all, as long as you are within the psychophysical aggregates, which are the product of our karma and delusions, there's no pleasure. Therefore, it's important to develop the sense of wishing to be free from the cycle of existence. Because without that, then you are going to be attached to these pleasures of cycle of existence and bereft of true bliss and happiness. And as craving for existence chain us thoroughly, so which means being attached to the existence, the pleasures of cyclic existence. At first, search for a true renunciation. So, having developed through renunciation, then by cultivating in mind that this human life is so hard to find. So, developing renunciation comes through turning your mind away from the pleasures of this life and the next lives. So by cultivating in mind that this human life is hard to find and has no time, and yet has no time to spare, preoccupations with this life will cease. By contemplating repeatedly the truth of karma and samsaric suffering, preoccupation with next life will come to cease. And then the measure of having developed the true renunciation is taught in the next verse. As you habituate in this way, and when not even an instant of admiration arises for the prosperities of cyclic existence, and when the thought aspiring for liberation arises day and night, at this point true renunciation has arisen. So in order to develop renunciation, it would be powerful to use the verse which comes later, verse number 7 and 8. So the suffering that actually befalls us incessantly is because of self-cherishing attitude and also craving for existence. So they're being swept away constantly by the powerful rivers, such as craving and so forth. They're bound tightly with fetters of karma, most difficult to escape. So as long as you have this passion for the cycle of existence, to that extent you'll be bound in this samsara. And therefore, this attachment needs to be overcome, for which you need to overcome the exaggerated outlook on the pleasures. And these are rooted in grasping at true independent self. As Master Chandrakirti says, first being attached to oneself, thinking of me, you are attached to yourself, and then from there the attachment to mine arises. So we have this sense of, or the notion of a self which is concrete and solid within ourselves. And they're trapped inside the iron mesh of self-grasping, as says here. And they're enveloped from everywhere by the thick mists of ignorance. And so first you have the perception of your psychophysical aggregates, and on the basis of which you have this grasping at a self. So this self appears as if it's independent, and we also cling to that independent I. And similarly, it is the case with the external world that we see around us, that we perceive them to have some independent, objective existence. Unless we are able to think about emptiness, reflect on emptiness, what it means, this grasping at self, a true existence of oneself, will be there. So as opposed to this, we need to understand how grasping at true existence actually perceives self and things. And so on the basis of grasping at the self of phenomena, we have grasping at, we develop the grasping at the self of a person. And therefore, through these, they take birth within cyclic existence that has no end, where they are endlessly tormented by the three sufferings, by reflecting on all your mothers who suffer. So instead of saying all your mothers, here you switch it, and these words, all your mothers, by reflecting on this nature of mind, the suffering, such as conditions. I suffer such conditions. And I shall generate that of the true renunciation. So the last two lines have to have switched to pertaining to the renunciation. And then having developed it, such renunciation too, if it is not sustained by awakening mind, it will not become a cause of the perfect bliss of unexcelled enlightenment. Therefore, O intelligent ones, generate the excellent awakening. So even if you may have this true sense of renunciation, the wish to be free from cycle of existence, and you may fall into this extreme of wishing to become liberated for yourself alone, but devoid of bodhicitta, you will not reach the final unexcelled enlightenment. Therefore, if this renunciation is not complemented by the pure awakening mind, it will not be a cause for the unexcelled enlightenment, the highest enlightenment of Buddhahood. So the highest good heart is that of bodhicitta, As Master Kunalama Tenzin Gyaltsen says, if you want happiness for yourself or for others, cultivate bodhicitta, meditate on bodhicitta. If you want happiness in this life and the next lives, you meditate or cultivate bodhicitta. If you want happiness for yourself, and bodhicitta and practice bodhicitta, you'll have happiness. Because of bodhicitta and wishing others to be happy, you will draw others to yourself, towards you. Even birds and animals will come to you, are attracted to you. So bodhicitta is marvelous. Therefore, O intelligent ones, generate excellent awakening mind. So how do you go about with the practice of developing bodhicitta? We come to the same verses that were covered earlier. They are being swept away constantly by the four powerful rivers. They are bound tightly with fetters of karmic karma, most difficult to escape. They are trapped inside the iron mesh of self-grasping. They are enveloped from everywhere by the thick mists of ignorance. So although we do not want suffering, we are overcome with suffering endlessly. Even though we want happiness, we are bereft of happiness because of self-cherishing attitude and these negative emotions. Therefore, we need to understand how true cessation is something that is possible for us to gain. And therefore, we need to reflect on emptiness. And for that, we need to base ourselves on the writings of Master Chandrakirti, who teaches the subtle dependent arising. His writings are very helpful to gain an insight into the thought of Master Nagarjuna. So you find that true cessation is something possible to attain, and that this grasping at true existence is something distorted, a distorted view or perception. So if you are fully convinced that things do not exist the way they appear to you, you'll be able to do away with this the grasping at true existence, so that you understand it is not in the intrinsic nature of the mind, whereas emptiness is the true nature of mind, and that the mind has its nature of being luminous and aware. So through these understanding, then you will have conviction that it's possible for me to develop true cessation within myself, and that you are able to do away with, overcome the true grasping at true existence, and you'll also put effort in developing this wisdom, realizing selflessness or emptiness. And then you'll see the possibility of attaining nirvana, and then there's this aspiration that develops to aspire to reach that. And then when you see this possibility for yourself, you also will have this sense of and the understanding and insight that it is possible for others also to have the same attainments, just like yourself. And then the sense of wishing others to be free from suffering and so forth also develops. And so this is how to go about with the teaching of the Buddha, understanding the coarser levels of the teachings, and then progressing towards the subtler understanding of the teaching. So that this true grasping at true existence would say that, oh, now I have no place in your mind, I'll leave you, take leave from you. So far, what it has done is that it has become our master, as if it's our master and protector and so forth. But once you gain this insight into the true grasping at true existence, being a distorted, completely erroneous state of mind, then it will take leave from you. In one of the writings of Aggregates Gyatso, which mentions that this kind of human life is very rare in terms of examples or analogies and in terms of its causes. And one person said that one Chinese has said that, oh, this Lama has not been to China. If he had gone to China, he'll see how it's not the case that human life is rare. So if you find this kind of human life with leisure and opportunity to be rare, and that it is not going to live, that you are not going to live long, and then you develop the sense to practice the Dharma for future lives and so forth. So it is important to understand the teaching of the Four Noble Truths. So this is very essential. Master Tsongkahpa mentions in his Lamrim Chamo that this has to be the broad framework within which we need to put the teaching of the Buddha and explain to others. So without understanding the true cessation, you will not have the true renunciation. And without understanding the true path, you will not have the antidote to this true grasping at true existence. So with regard to developing bodhicitta, there is this system or the tradition of the sevenfold cause and effect instruction. And then there is also this equaling and exchanging self and others. So there's no greater text than a guide to the bodhisattva way of life for this second system of training the mind for bodhicitta. Kunalama Rinpoche Tenzin Gyaltsen used to tell me that since this text was written by Shantideva in the 8th century, there has not been any greater text for developing the bodhicitta, and there will not be any in the future as well. So with regard to bodhicitta, in the text there is no mention of the measure of having developed this genuine sense of bodhicitta. But it should be inferred from the measure of having developed renunciation that was taught earlier. So priests generate the supreme awakening mind. If you do not have the wisdom realizing the ultimate nature, even if you gain familiarity with the renunciation of awakening mind, you will not be able to cut the root of samsaric existence. So strive in the means of realizing dependent origination. Here, Master Tsongkahpa does not mention develop the realizing emptiness or selflessness, but dependent arising. It has its own significance, special significance. So he says, strive in the means of realizing dependent origination. So this term, dependent origination, here refers to when the subtle understanding of dependence, interdependence, that things are merely designated in name. So the subtle understanding of, unless you gain this subtle understanding of self-dependent arising, You may think that this understanding of dependent origination does not actually go against the grasping at true existence. So here, dependent origination or dependent arising refers to subtle dependence, which has the power to dispel both the nihilistic view and the eternalistic view simultaneously. And therefore it mentions striving to realize dependent arising when, with respect to all phenomena, samsara and nirvana, you see that cause and effects never deceive their laws, and when you have dismantled the focus of objectification, at that point you have entered the path that pleases the Buddhas. So first the Buddha went through the teaching of law of causality. So you gain understanding into that of workings of karma and its effects. And within these dependence, we also have the dependence in terms of how things are dependent on their objects or the basis of designation. So if we think about the basis of designation of a person, for example, of course, nothing whatever within the psychophysical aggregates can be pinpointed as being this and that. So by understanding the law of causality, which is infallible, incontrovertible, undeniable, what you find is that not just the effect is dependent on its cause, but the cause gains its identity in relation to the effect. And then you gain understanding into the subtle understanding of dependence, that the So when you do analysis into how things are through the fourfold reasoning and so forth, you see that they are ultimately, things are merely designated. So things are merely in name and merely designated. So when you understand that things are merely imputed through dependence on other factors, it gives you the insight that things do not have any independent existence, but that they are dependently existent. And therefore, the designated object and the basis of designation also can be seen as being mutually dependent. So emptiness is said to be without any assertion. So the next verse is, so long as two understandings of appearance, which is undeceiving dependent origination, and emptiness devoid of all thesis remain separate, to that extent you have not realized the intent of the sage. So you're not able to actually complement the understanding that dependent origination means being empty of any true objective existence. And having further pushed yourself to gain deeper understanding of emptiness and dependent origination through accumulation of merit, which also, of course, has to be done to support your development of the insight. Not in just in few months or years, but you need to put effort for years and years. This I can tell from my own experience. I have gained some insight into emptiness, not within a few years, but many years, for over 40 years. It's not easy. So the nature of mind is such that it does not remain static, because it's a compounded phenomena. And therefore, we can use our intelligence to gain insight into this nature of things, being empty. And that you will, of course, be able to develop this understanding that things are merely in name and merely nominal. And the more you gain understanding that things come about through causes and conditions, you will be able to also develop and have this insight that they do not have any independent objective existence. So this does not come easily, but through effort over many years. So, however, at some point when, without alternation, but at once, the instant you see the dependent origination undeceiving, if the entire object of grasping at certitude is dismantled, at that point your analysis of the view has culminated. Further, when appearance dispels the extremes of existence and when emptiness dispels the extreme of non-existence, and if you're understanding how emptiness arises as cause and effect, you will never be captivated by views grasping at extremes. So the profundity and the specialty of the teaching of the Buddha must come through this understanding of emptiness. Emptiness as taught in the lower schools, or selflessness as taught in the lower schools, and then emptiness taught in Chittamatra, and further progressing to the emptiness taught in Madhyamaka philosophy. So that when you actually find it, so that you find this view of emptiness in the Madhyamaka tradition amazing. And then this actually helps you to counter your negative emotions. And you see that it's possible for you to overcome it completely. And then you actually come to understand that true cessation is possible. And therefore, you have the possibility to tread along the path as referred to by the mantra of Heart Sutra, Tatyatha Gati, Gati, Paragati, Parasangati, Bodhiswaha. So that you gain, on the basis of reason, you will have the aspiration to reach nirvana and that of the omniscient state. And so understanding of emptiness helps us to develop true renunciation, the aspiration to be free from samsara as well as bodhicitta. And then when you go into tantric practice, you actually arise into a form of a deity, visualizing yourself as a deity, which actually must happen on the basis of understanding emptiness. From within the meditation on emptiness, you arise into the form of a deity. Otherwise, it's just... And then when you come across Vajrabhairava, it is said that two horns represent the two truths and so forth. And then we can also say that if you don't have the understanding of emptiness, the entire teaching well, you can also say that two ears can represent the two truths, or two eyes can represent the two truths, and the two nostrils can also represent two truths and so forth. But when you understand emptiness well, and Master, the seventh Dalai Lama says this, at the crossroads of the six perceptions, which has its diverse perceptions, are seen the hazy dualistic appearance, which are baseless. There is a magical show which is by nature deceptive. Don't believe it to be true, but view it as having a nature of emptiness. Don't let your mind stray, but place it in nature of appearance and emptiness, and without losing mindfulness, hold it in the nature of emptiness and appearance. And so in this text, it says, and if your understanding of emptiness arises as cause and effect, you'll not be captivated by the views of grasping at extremes. So these two understandings of dependence and emptiness complement each other. Thus, when you have understood as they are the essentials of the three principal aspects of the path, O son, seek solitude, and by enhancing the power of perseverance, swiftly accomplish your ultimate aspiration. This advice was given by the monk Lobsang Drakpa Pel to Ngawan Drakpa, a leading person of Tsako region. So, as it is mentioned here, the Bodhichitta is very precious. The Kadam masters of the past have said that as long as you are able to consider others to be more important than oneself, and you gain some experience of bodhicitta, which considers others to be, which cherishes others to be more important than oneself, this itself will purify negativities, and this itself will accrue merits and wisdom. So there is no greater factor than bodhicitta for purification of negativities and collection of wisdom and merit. And for longevity also, there's nothing greater than bodhicitta. So whether one's tantric practices for longevity and so forth becomes effective or not is dependent on whether you have this bodhicitta or not. So the teaching of the Buddha must be, the profundity and its specialty must be expressed through the practice of bodhicitta. Book don't you have the book? So for bodhicitta, His Holiness says he will use this verse. The one verse that we usually say for refuge and bodhicitta. So we'll do a bodhicitta ceremony, I think. So Buddha is said to be someone who is the incomparable speaker or teacher because of the practice of bodhicitta. He wasn't someone who was an incomparable or without going through the practice of bodhicitta. So Buddha has gone through the path. He wasn't enlightened right from the beginning, but he became enlightened by progressing along the path that led him to that state of enlightenment, omniscience. And he is the one who is free from all faults and who embodies all positive qualities within himself. The reason is because he is an incomparable teacher. So as I've mentioned before, masters, we have to imagine the Buddha who lived 2,600 years ago, in person here before you, surrounded by the great bodhisattvas and also great masters like Nagarjuna and Mahasiddhas like Saraha and so forth, and also the great masters of Tibet, of the different Buddhist traditions of Tibet. So we are going to go through the process of generating bodhicitta before them. So in order to generate bodhicitta, we need to do the 7-limb practice, we'll just say the one verse. I dedicate whatever merit and wisdom I have gained through prostration, making offering, confession, rejoicing, requesting the Buddhas not to pass away, and requesting them to turn the wheel of Dharma for the highest enlightenment. So we say this 3 times for accumulation of merit and purification of activities. So let us say this verse of taking refuge and bodhicitta. So most of you know this verse. So imagine the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are our witness here, and think that so far we have been under the power of our self-cherishing attitude and grasping at true existence. But today, having gained some understanding of the teaching of the Buddha, you see the benefit of, or the good qualities of cherishing others, and see the faults and the disadvantage of cherishing oneself, and also gain understanding that grasping at true existence has no basis and that it is totally distorted view. So just as the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas have generated bodhicitta within themselves and also engaged in the practices of bodhisattvas, likewise, you make determination that I will do so. So taking them as examples and your role models, you think of developing bodhicitta. So the past Buddhas became enlightened because of cultivating bodhicitta, developing bodhicitta, and those who are becoming Buddhas presently also do so on the basis of practicing bodhicitta. And in the future also, other beings will become Buddhas because of the practice of bodhicitta. Please kneel on your right knee and repeat these lines of refuge and bodhicitta after me. Please repeat these lines. To the Buddha, Dharma, and Supreme Assembly, I seek refuge until enlightenment is reached. May I become Buddha to benefit all sentient beings through the practice of generosity and so forth. To the Buddha, Dharma, and Supreme Assembly, I seek refuge until enlightenment is reached. May, through the practice of generosity and so forth, through the 2 collections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. At the end of the 3rd repetition now, when you say, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings, you make a strong, firm pledge that from now on, this bodhicitta, which is complemented by the 2 aspirations, you will acquaint your mind with it so that gradually you'll be able to even have the courage to make such a prayer. As long as space remains, as long as sentient beings remain, may I too remain in order to dispel the suffering of wandering beings, so that you will be able to develop this bodhicitta, genuine bodhicitta within yourself. The purpose of becoming enlightened and omniscient being is to help others as long as space remains, as this prayer says. So you should have that kind of courage and determination. So please repeat. To the Buddha, Dharma, and Supreme Assembly, I seek refuge until enlightenment is reached. Through the collection of merit and wisdom, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May the precious sublime bodhicitta arise where it has not arisen, where it has taken root. May it never decline but increase ever further. If you do not exchange one's happiness with the suffering of others, leave alone reaching omniscient Buddhahood, even in samsara, you will not have happiness. May I become a sustenance for infinite beings, just like the earth and the space. Which intelligent person will not ride the horse of Bodhichitta, which leads one from bliss to bliss and does away with all despair? As long as space remains, as long as sentient beings remains, may I too remain to dispel the suffering of wandering beings. Please sit down. So with this, we are done with the generation of Bodhichitta. So it's 11:30 now. So you have gathered here today, and I've given teaching on the three principal aspects of the path. So having gathered here, we have to make this occasion as an occasion to be to set ourselves on the path to enlightenment. Otherwise, it doesn't serve much purpose. So I do generate bodhicitta. On a daily basis, we are same human. We have the same brain, and we are same in not wanting suffering, but wanting happiness. And therefore, you should also give thought to this. That, of course, you are under the power of your negative emotions, but try to gain some control over your negative emotions and also gain control over your self-cherishing attitude with cherishing others over oneself. So from now on, you should do your best to set yourself on the path so that when you die happily. Otherwise, if you are preoccupied with the pleasures of this life, materialistic way of life, then you will die with lots of apprehension and fear and so forth, and regret. Quando sangbo tiang ti shinde te da kun ge jeso ta lo chin ke wa ti da tam je rab tong o tu su she ge o wa kan la chok dong ba te da gi ke we za wa ti kun ke sangbo chu chi rab tong o wa gi. So the photo sessions with the sponsors and the parents of the Namgyal Monastery monks.